I never thought I'd fall in love because of my dog running away, but here we are. Let me tell you about the worst and best day of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, one of those perfect autumn days where the air smells like falling leaves and possibility. I was working from home, buried in spreadsheets and conference calls, when I made the mistake that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. I left the front door cracked open while bringing in groceries. Just for a minute. Just long enough to grab the last 2 bags from my car. That's all it took. My Beagle mix captain saw his chance and bolted. By the time I realized what happened, he was gone. Completely vanished into the suburban maze of identical houses and manicured lawns. I'm not exaggerating when I say I panicked. Captain wasn't just my dog. He was my companion through a brutal breakup, through changing careers, through moving to this new city where I barely knew anyone. He was the living creature who greeted me every single day like I was the most important person in the world. And I'd let him escape. I spent 2 hours searching. I walked every street in my neighborhood, calling his name until my voice went hoarse. I posted on neighborhood apps, called the local shelter, knocked on doors of houses where I'd seen other dogs. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. The sun was starting to set, and I was genuinely terrified. Captain had no sense of direction and even less sense of danger. The thought of him scared and alone, or worse, hit by a car, was destroying me. I was standing on my front porch trying to figure out what to do next when I saw someone walking up my driveway. A guy about my age, maybe late 20s with dark curly hair and these incredibly kind eyes. And in his arms, wagging his tail like he'd just had the adventure of his lifetime, was Captain. I literally felt my knees go weak with relief. I ran down the steps and Captain launched himself at me, licking my face, completely oblivious to the emotional trauma he'd caused. I was laughing and maybe crying a little, and this stranger was just standing there with his gentle smile, watching our reunion. When I finally pulled myself together enough to look at him properly, I realized he was gorgeous. Not in an intimidating model way, but in this warm, approachable way that immediately made you want to know him better. He was wearing a faded college sweatshirt and jeans, and he had this presence about him that felt calm and steady. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice still shaky. "Thank you so much. Where did you find him?" "About 3 blocks over," he said, and his voice matched everything else about him. Warm, genuine, with just a hint of amusement. He was very interested in someone's trash cans. I saw he had a collar, so I figured he belonged to someone nearby who was probably losing their mind. "That's exactly what I was doing," I admitted. "I'm Marcus, by the way, and this escape artist is Captain." "Dashiell," he said, reaching out to shake my hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and I noticed he had paint stains on his fingers. I'm glad I could help. I know what it's like to worry about a pet. I should have just thanked him again and let him leave. That would have been the normal thing to do. But something made me ask, "How did you know which house was mine? This neighborhood is huge." He laughed, and I liked the sound of it. "I knocked on a lot of doors. Like a lot. I figured whoever owned him would be grateful enough that they wouldn't mind being interrupted. Most people weren't home, but the ones who were gave me some weird looks when I showed up with a random dog asking if he was theirs. I was stunned. "You went door to door? That must have taken forever." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Maybe 45 minutes. I started with the houses closest to where I found him and worked outward. It seemed like the logical approach." He scratched Captain behind the ears. "Besides, this guy has a very lovable face. I couldn't just leave him wandering around." There was something about that moment, standing in my driveway in the fading light, watching this stranger be so casually kind to both my dog and me, that made my heart do this weird flip. I told myself it was just gratitude and relief, but I knew it was more than that. I was aware of him in a way I hadn't been aware of anyone in months. The way his hair curled slightly at his neck, The genuine warmth in his expression, the fact that he'd spent 45 minutes of his life helping a lost dog find his way home. "Can I at least offer you something?" I asked. "Coffee? Water? I feel like I owe you more than just a thank you." He hesitated, and for a second I thought he'd say no. Then he smiled. "Coffee would be great, actually. I've been walking around for a while." That's how Dashiell ended up in my kitchen, sitting at my counter while I made coffee with shaking hands, still coming down from the adrenaline of the last few hours. Captain was passed out in his bed, exhausted from his adventure, leaving the two of us in this surprisingly comfortable silence. "So you're an artist?" I asked, nodding at his paint-stained hands. He looked down like he'd forgotten about them. "Guilty. I paint and do some graphic design work. Mostly freelance, which means I have a very flexible schedule for dog rescue missions." "Lucky for me," I said. "I'm in finance, which is significantly less interesting but pays the bills." "I don't know," Dashiell said, accepting the coffee mug I handed him. "Numbers have their own kind of beauty, patterns and logic and predictability." It was such an unexpectedly thoughtful thing to say that I found myself just staring at him for a second. He noticed and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just most people think finance is boring." "Most things are only boring if you don't understand them," he replied. Then he grinned. "But I'll admit, I barely passed college algebra, so maybe I'm not the best judge." We talked for an hour, just sat there in my kitchen, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about moving to the city 2 years ago to be closer to an art community. I told him about my own move 6 months earlier, how I was still figuring out where I fit in this place. He was easy to talk to in a way that felt rare and valuable. There were no awkward silences, no struggling for topics. The conversation just flowed naturally from one subject to another. I found myself noticing little things about him, the way he cupped his coffee mug with both hands, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The thoughtful pause he'd take before answering a question, like he actually cared about giving a genuine response. And underneath all of that, I was acutely aware of an attraction building. This pull toward him that I hadn't felt in a long time. When he finally said he should probably head home, I felt genuinely disappointed. He'd been in my house for barely over an hour, but it felt like we'd known each other longer, like we'd skipped past all the surface-level small talk and gone straight to something more real. "Thank you again," I said, walking him to the door. "Seriously, you saved my life today, or at least Captain's life, which is basically the same thing." "I'm glad I could help," Dashiell said. He paused on my front step like he was considering something, then pulled out his phone. "This might be forward, but could I get your number, just to check in and make sure Captain settles in okay after his big adventure?" My heart jumped. "Yeah, absolutely. That would be great." We exchanged numbers, and then he was walking down my driveway, giving me a little wave before he turned the corner and disappeared. I stood there for a minute, just processing what had happened. Then I went inside, looked at Captain and said, "If you planned that, you're a genius." He wagged his tail, completely unaware that he'd just changed my life. Dashiell texted me the next morning, all day, about our work, about the city, all day, about our work, about the city, about nothing in particular. It felt natural and exciting in a way that made me check my phone constantly, hoping for another message. 3 days later, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. Actual coffee, at a cafe, like a deliberate plan. I said yes before I even thought about it. That coffee date turned into a 3-hour conversation where we barely noticed the cafe closing around us. We talked about our families, our fears, what we wanted from life. Dashiell told me about growing up in a small town where being different felt impossible, about finding himself when he moved to a bigger city. I told him about my own journey, about coming out in college, about the relationship that had brought me to this city and then fallen apart. "Can I ask you something?" he said at one point, his expression serious. "Sure," I replied, my stomach suddenly tight with nerves. "That first day in your kitchen, did you feel it too? That connection?" I could have played it safe, could have pretended I didn't know what he meant. Instead, I was honest. "Yeah, I did. I thought maybe I was imagining it." "You weren't," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about you constantly since then, which is either really romantic or slightly concerning, depending on your perspective." I laughed, feeling this rush of relief and excitement. "I'm going with romantic." That was the beginning of us. We started seeing each other regularly, and every date felt like discovering something new and wonderful. Dashiell took me to art galleries and explained paintings in ways that made me see them differently. I took him to this tiny Thai restaurant I discovered, and we argued playfully about whether the curry or the pad Thai was better. We went on long walks where Captain trotted between us, probably feeling very proud of himself for bringing us together. The first time Dashiell held my hand, we were walking through a park at sunset. He just reached over and laced his fingers through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt it everywhere, that simple touch. It was such a small gesture, but it meant everything. It meant he wanted this too, that I wasn't alone in feeling this growing attachment. Our first kiss happened a few weeks later. We were at his apartment, looking at his paintings. He'd been nervous to show them to me, worried about being too vulnerable, but they were beautiful. Abstract pieces full of color and emotion that somehow captured feelings I didn't have words for. I told him they were incredible, and he looked at me with this expression that was equal parts grateful and uncertain. "I'm really glad you're here," he said softly. "Me too," I replied. And then somehow we were closer, and then his hand was on my face, and then we were kissing. It was gentle and perfect, and felt like coming home. When we pulled apart, he was smiling, and I realized I was too. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Same," I said. I was starting to think I'd have to make the first move. I was working up the courage, he laughed. "Turns out it's terrifying when you really like someone." "Terrifying," I agreed, "but worth it." Things deepened between us after that. We fell into this easy rhythm where we'd spend most evenings together, either at his place or mine. We cooked dinner together, watched movies, talked for hours about everything and nothing. He met my friends and charmed them all. I met his art community and felt welcomed into this creative world I'd never been part of before. But it wasn't just the big moments that made me fall for him. It was the small things. The way he'd text me random thoughts throughout the day. How he always asked about my work and actually listened to my boring finance stories. The fact that he bought Captain special treats and remembered which ones he liked best. How he'd reach for my hand without thinking about it, like touching me was as natural as breathing. About 2 months into dating, I realized I was in love with him. We were at my place, and he was reading on my couch while I worked on my laptop. Captain was sprawled across both our laps, snoring contentedly. It was completely ordinary and absolutely perfect, and I looked at Dashiell and thought, this is it. This is what I want for the rest of my life. The thought terrified me. My last relationship had ended badly, with trust broken and feelings hurt. I'd moved here to start over, to figure out who I was on my own. I hadn't been looking for love. But here it was anyway, sitting on my couch, absently petting my dog while reading a book about color theory. I must have been staring because Dashiell looked up and caught my eye. "What?" he asked, smiling. I could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject. Instead, I decided to be brave. "I think I'm falling in love with you." His eyes widened, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then his face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Yeah?" "Yeah," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "Is that okay?" He set his book down and shifted closer, dislodging a very annoyed captain. "Marcus, I've been in love with you since that second coffee date, when you spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between various types of investment accounts and somehow made it fascinating. So, yes, it's more than okay." I kissed him then, deep and meaningful, trying to pour everything I felt into it. When we broke apart, he was still smiling, and I felt lighter than I had in years. "I can't believe all this happened because my dog ran away," I said. "Best escape artist ever," Dashiell agreed, reaching down to scratch Captain's head. "Remind me to buy him extra treats." That was 8 months ago. Dashiell and I are still together, still discovering new things about each other, still falling deeper into this relationship that started with a knock on my door and a lost dog. We're talking about moving in together, about combining our lives in all the permanent, scary, wonderful ways. Sometimes I think about that day, about how close I came to never meeting him, if Captain had run in a different direction, if Dashiell had decided not to bother knocking on doors, if I'd been too frazzled to invite him in for coffee. So many small moments that could have gone differently. But they didn't. Somehow, against all odds, everything aligned perfectly. My dog escaped. A kind stranger found him, and that stranger turned out to be the person I was meant to find. It sounds like something from a movie, but it's my real life. Our real life. Last week, Dashiell finished a new painting. It's abstract, full of warm autumn colors, and when I asked him what it was, he said it was about the day we met, about connection and chance and love found in unexpected places. He hung it in my living room, right where I can see it every day. Captain sleeps underneath it, completely oblivious to his role in our love story. But sometimes I catch Dashiell looking at that painting with his soft expression, and I know he's thinking the same thing I am, that we're incredibly lucky, that love shows up in the strangest ways, that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them. I never thought I'd fall in love because my dog ran away, but I did. And I'd do it all again, the panic and fear and worry, just to have Dashiell knock on my door one more time, just to see him standing there with Captain in his arms and that gentle smile on his face, just to have the chance to discover what we could become together. Some people search their whole lives for connection like this. I found mine 3 blocks away from home, brought to my door by a beagle mix with terrible direction and a stranger with a kind heart. And every single day I'm grateful for it.